I am transgender. Growing up, it was scary. I didn't have anyone to talk to. My family didn't understand. It's a struggle to be real. Society, for some reason, doesn't want people to be real. I've come across a lot of transgender children in the world, and I want to do everything in my power to make sure that they don't go through the things that I went through. It doesn't matter what gender you are. It doesn't matter what you look like. It just matters, are you a good person? I want someone to know it's okay to be transgender. It's okay to discover that you're not transgender if you think you are. It's okay to be gender fluid. It's okay to be gender neutral. It's okay to be gender non-conforming. It's okay to be male. It's okay to be female. It's okay to be gay, straight, lesbian. It's okay. Just please be a good person. Be kind. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of Kelly's Quest. We're continuing our journey on the Yes on 3 campaign, and in the first episode we looked at the speakers that were going around talking to the community, and then in the second episode I brought on the media relations kind of people so they could give us an idea of what was happening with radio, TV, newspapers, podcasts, and things such as that. And now I kind of want to talk about how this was funded. How could we afford to fight this fight? Because nothing like this would have ever been done without money and without the gracious giving of people. So today I have brought on Nancy Stager. She is the Executive Vice President of Human Resources and Charitable Giving at Eastern Bank. And Nancy, thank you so much for being here today.
It's my pleasure, Kelly. I'm glad to be here with you.
It's going to be a fun conversation. I think the first thing I would like to discuss is, before we came on air, you were talking about how the Yes on 3 campaign was developed long before the Yes on 3 campaign ever really came into existence, that you all were working towards this Yes on 3 campaign. I was hoping you could kind of give us a brief history of that.
Eastern's involvement started in about 2010 when I started to become aware of the need for the protections for people who are transgender, and was asked in, I think it was June of 2011, to testify at a joint committee of the House and the Senate in Massachusetts to explain why companies would be interested in supporting the human rights of people who are transgender. And because a lot of people go, well, why would companies be involved at all? And I think there's some very clear reasons why companies would, in addition to just the very basic human fact of protecting human rights. So I went because I understood kind of at a, I'll say, surface level at that point, that protecting human rights is just a good idea. But then when I went that first in June of 2011, I heard so many compelling stories directly from people who are transgender, and I think that's the hardest part for people is if you've heard the story of what people have gone through, you can't help but be compelled to want to help in some way, whatever that way is. And so for me, that first day, I think that testimony went on until about 9 o'clock at night. It was hot and it was long, but it was worth it. And we thought we were going to be able to protect the human rights of people who are transgender all at once in that setting. Right?
This was in 2011.
It's 2011, a really long time ago now. But the idea was that all those rights, and what ended up happening was that a portion, unlike any other human rights protections in Massachusetts, no other population of people have had some rights protected, but other rights not protected. But that's in fact what happened. Certain rights were protected in schools and in employment and so on, but other rights, like public accommodations, were not. And so we decided after that happened that we should work on protecting the rest of the human rights of people who are transgender.
I wasn't here in 2011,
Yeah.
and what the story you're telling now, Nancy, is one of the reasons I moved to here in 2014
Oh, really?
was
Good.
because I did research, and
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, Massachusetts, at least where I work in a school system, I will be protected.
Yeah.
Because in Tennessee, I had no protections in a school system, and it was not a pleasant experience. I wasn't tenured or anything like that, so I didn't even have that level of protection. So thank you for that. Without that,
Well, it wasn't just me. There was a lot of other people, but you know, I think people who spend time to understand the issue, who value human rights, recognize that you have to do something. And so I did my part. That's the part that I did. And I remember you telling me that story of what it was like in Tennessee and trying to go from one district to another. And you know, no one should have to go through that, right? I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Everybody should have a shot at being their best self, and everybody should have a shot at giving their best contribution and being themselves. I mean, how simple is that? Just to be yourself. And so that's, you know, what. So a group of us from all different sectors, from companies, from nonprofits in the area, individuals, clergy, you know, police and other public safety
Was that hard to
people.
organize, or
No,
was it?
because I think there were a lot of people who just said, this is strange that we're bifurcating or splitting in half those protections. And literally it was at the point where, you know, you couldn't discriminate against someone who's transgender for employment in, let's say, a coffee shop or something. But if that same person came in for service, they could be discriminated. It was, you know, we were in an unsettled aspect of it. And so we started working, meaning me and Karen Young over at Harvard Pilgrim and Liz Schwab over at Google, as well as, you know, really strong advocates like Mason Dunn and I don't remember if Gunnar Scott was still doing it at that point or whether he had moved out west, but there were a lot of people who banded together and said, all right, we need to get more people, because the way to win this is to get more people to understand why it's necessary and what the implications of that would be, and make it less scary, because the more knowledge you have, the less scary it is.
So it sounds like there was no lull between 2011 and 2016 whatsoever. It's just like, we're continuing
There
on
may have
with
been
it.
a few nights of a bottle of wine, but no, because it needed to carry on. And what we did was spend a lot on the business side, which is where I was primarily engaged. We wanted to get out to more businesses so that they could understand why their voice was necessary, what the implications for business in Massachusetts was. Because remember, the whole thing of what happened in North Carolina happened kind of in that same time frame.
It sure did.
You know, so we had living proof of what could happen here, and of course, Massachusetts is more progressive than North Carolina, at least from my perspective. More
From mine
progressive.
also.
More progressive than North Carolina. So if we were to fall backwards, it would have been a much more negative, long-term economic impact.
You almost expect some states to take away rights of people, but not Massachusetts.
Yeah, I think that's.
When it's said that you almost I do expect, like I'm sure right now in the U.S., who knows how many anti-transgender bills are being pushed through legislation or trying to.
Yeah.
And I chose this state, not like I said, when I moved here in 2014, it was to be an educator, and it was because I met strong, authentic transgender people up here that were willing to express it to the world in a way that I was not used to. In Tennessee, I told no one that I was transgender. That's part of my story is down there, once I transitioned, I buttoned my lips because I wanted to have employment, I wanted to keep friends, and I thought, if I tell anyone I'm transgender, I'm going to lose all of those things. And I was a drain on the economy for a while because I couldn't find employment. I had very low self-esteem, so I had to start using healthcare systems. I had to start going on food stamps. And these were things for me that I'm glad that they were there as a safety net, but that wasn't what I wanted for myself. I wanted to go work as an educator in a school system and not have to use those services. Thank
Sure.
goodness they were there.
Yeah, and you know, they're intended as a safety net, and I'm glad they were there for you. But you know, at the end of the day, the energy you had to spend to hide who you were is energy you can't spend finding a job, keeping a job, doing a great job for kids, or whatever. And you know, that's a big piece of why I personally am committed to this, because everybody should be able to just be who they are. If you don't have to, in my mind, waste that energy by pretending to be something you're other than you are, or hiding who you are, then you can use that same energy for good. You know, you can do things that are more in keeping with your true self. And you know, I guess I just hate to waste talent. You know, if you're a talented teacher or a banker or a lawyer or whatever, isn't it better for everyone if you're in a position to give your best efforts?
For me, the school system that I'm in right now lets me be my authentic self, and therefore I get to go help these students and not worry all of the time. I still have a lot of baggage from Tennessee, but I don't worry all the time about, am I going to lose my job today because I'm transgender? And I imagine that a lot of people that are marginalized, when they come to you for employment, you have to work through things like, is this person's resume not strong because they are transgender and they've been fired from 40 jobs because they're transgender, not because they're qualified? And it has to be a very challenging thing, because you go look for talented people out there that are in different communities, and I appreciate that you actually do that hard work of searching.
Yeah, sometimes people have gaps in their resume, and any employer is left to guess what those are unless they ask. And for some people, that's a really tough answer. And if the company isn't in a position to look past that, to look to the skills that the person brings, then you can miss out on a really talented person.
The more diverse of a population of employees you have, I feel like the more insightful ideas you have as well.
You know, I've been working on diversity and inclusion generally my entire career, and you know, for decades I would say, you know, it's really important to have diversity in the workforce, and you know, you can understand that intellectually. But when you actually get that diversity in the workforce and you see it live, and you see teams of people making better decisions, and you see customers wanting to come to you as opposed to another company, because you have people who speak their language. I mean, Eastern speaks over 50 different languages and dialects, and we're thrilled about that. Why? Because customers want that.
Because you probably have customers that speak 50
Absolutely,
languages.
right, probably more.
Right,
But, you
right.
know, so you know, the thing is that I have seen live that having diverse populations of people together in an environment where they can be themselves really does make a big difference. And it's very gratifying, having been in this space for so long, to actually see it play out in reality. But it is absolutely true. And there's been studies, McKinsey has done studies, and others have shown that when you bring people together of different backgrounds and different experiences, that you get better decisions. The company can evolve in ways that it wouldn't have if everybody was the same or of similar backgrounds.
And I think that as that has moved along, it really came into focus in 2016 when I finally got, for the first time in my life, I had equal rights.
Yeah.
With everybody else in this state, for the first time ever, I'm like, okay, I'm your equal in the eyes of the law. And that lasted about 2 weeks, because then
That
there
was
was
painful.
enough signatures on this petition. And I had to start thinking, okay, maybe my rights are going to be taken away from me. And at this point, I had started doing this TV show, and I talked to a couple of people, but I really had no way of understanding how I was going to become involved with keeping my rights. Like I didn't feel like that this TV show was going to help me keep my rights. Like I had to go do other things. And Eastern Bank was out there working with a lot of different organizations, and I'd kind of like to discuss now how at that point when the petition got enough signatures to where the attempted repeal was going to actually happen, if we can kind of walk through what Eastern Bank's role was at that point, because y'all had been going full steam ahead up until 2016, so I guess you kicked the turbo in at that point or something.
I think kicking the turbo in is a great description, because that's really what it was. And it was a little bit of fierceness. I think we were kind of, you know,
I could see you
mad,
fired up.
I think. Yeah, fired up. That's a good way to put it. We were fired up because, you know, having gone through 2011 and being disappointed that we got half a loaf, in effect, which is kind of strange way to describe it, maybe. But
No,
you know,
it
what
makes
we
sense.
didn't. It was not fulfilling, because we weren't able to protect all the human rights as we had done for other populations in Massachusetts. And you know, Byron Rushing said something interesting then. He said that, you know, human rights are given from God. They are not given by legislation. What the legislation does is protect those rights. And, you know, I've never forgotten that, because
It is powerful.
It was a real, like, whoa, I hadn't thought of it that way. But, you know, people deserve to be people. And sometimes we need to protect their rights from others. So I've always carried that comment, you know, with me. But so we went through that, and so we started to band groups together and get more together. And we had maybe, I think, something like 250 or 300 businesses, nonprofits, for-profits, but in our business campaign coming into the 2015, 2016 timeframe, before we had the testimony and the you know, law reintroduced, we were building alliances. You know, and I think that's a very important point in how we were able to be successful in the long run, was that we were not looking for just people who are transgender, or people who love someone who's transgender, or they're a family member of transgender, but we looked much more broadly. You know, we looked for members of the clergy, members of public safety, you know, police commissioners and police officers, and we went to the Bruins and the Red Sox and the Patriots, all of whom supported transgender rights. You know, these are names that are helpful for people because they recognize them, and they go, well, if the Bruins are okay with this, why is this a problem? You know, and others too. So there was a lot of effort kind of coming into that 2016 timeframe to build out the coalition. And we were successful when we thought we had 300 companies and 300, you know, and as well as many others involved. And then we got the law passed, and everybody was psyched, because we got the other half, right? It's now complete, it's now whole. People can be their authentic self, and they don't have to worry about that. They can come from Tennessee or wherever and come here and have a fulfilling life. And isn't that what it's all about? And then, like you said, 2 weeks later, we got the gut punch.
It was a big gut punch.
It was a gut punch.
It was horrible.
It was like, what do you mean? You know, it was really hard to think that someone, or a small population of people, it doesn't take very many signatures, truthfully. I think it's 32,000 signatures.
32,000 people.
And, you know, a lot of people see someone with a table and they've got a petition, and they come up and they don't even really fully appreciate what they're signing, always. And so, you know, 32 signatures, not that many.
I think when I heard that my rights were now up for an actual
referendum,
and that the Massachusetts was going to get to go into a voting booth and determine whether or not I was truly human. That's how I looked at this.
Yeah,
it's
I can
like,
see
are
that.
you? Because if you're not truly human, then we can take your rights away from you. But if
Yeah.
you're truly human, we can't take your rights away from you.
Mm.
And at that point, that's where on my side of it, I started reaching out to the Yes on 3 campaign. And I know that you were already working with several people that ended up being a part of that coalition. So you had already met Casey Suffredini, Mason Dunn, and all of that group.
And Karina Patel and
Yep.
yeah, and Matt Wilder, who's been on your show
And Matt
before,
Wilder,
and
yep.
others as well. Yeah, after the gut punch, you know, so quickly after the passage of the legislation, we recognized that this was, you know, Sally bar the doors. We've got to get this done. And so although we were happy with 300 businesses going into the 16 legislation, we said no. We've got to, you know, as you said, use the turbo, right? And just get as big a coalition as we could possibly get. And you know, so I was working with others and with some friends of mine within Eastern to do it. And one day I went into Bob Rivers and said, you know, we need more money. You know, we have to get airtime, we have to do all these things. And so we were kind of blue skying, what does that look like? How might we be able to encourage companies to use their voice? Because companies are becoming more active now, which is wonderful. But you know, in the 2015, 16, 17 timeframe, there was a lot of questions like, why would I do this? What, you know, why is it important enough for us to use our corporate voice? And of course, it's important as companies to have the talent, to make sure that there's no channel conflict, that a person, you know, can't be a customer but could be could be an employee.
You know, I had never
just
thought
kind
of it as
weird
that take before. That's an interesting take that you
And then we
offered.
also had a number of cities and towns that were creating their own not bylaws, but regulations within the cities and towns that would protect transgender rights. So it kind of ended up with this patchwork of some cities and towns doing it. And of course, there were something like 18 other states that had fully protected the human rights of people who are transgender ahead of us. And so Bob said, well, we just got to do it. So we doubled down. And you know, he's a great person and a great leader. And he knows a lot more people in bigger companies than me. And you know, he made the phone calls, he asked, he cajoled probably, I don't know, I wasn't privy to all of those conversations, but at the end of the day, we hosted, this is just prior to the referendum, and I want to talk about the referendum as a referendum too. Let's put a pin in that one.
Okay.
But you know, we got a number of companies together to say, you know what, this is important. It's important to Massachusetts. We can't slide backwards. There's too much economic harm that could be done to the Commonwealth, and this is about human rights. And why should you feel less human, right? You said it. You know, why would anybody want that feeling, or to waste the talent of all the people who are transgender, or anybody else for that matter?
Exactly, just anybody. Why
Yeah.
waste the talent?
Right. And or why have this confusion of for companies that are in multiple towns, have a confusion. It's this way in this town, it's this way in another town, and it's over here differently. Let's just settle this law. And so we ended up with a coalition of over 800 companies.
It makes me smile.
Yeah, it makes me smile too, because this wasn't just Bob and me. Trust me, this was a lot of people working very hard, but because we were all working in the same way, we were able to pull together, and then to communicate that to broader populations, and in conjunction with everybody else working on the campaign, we were delighted, nervous on election night. But,
I remember election night,
yeah.
but
we did it.
There was a lot of hugs that night,
Oh,
Nancy.
it was a lot of hugs.
But let's talk about the referendum itself,
Yeah,
how we had to get up to those hugs.
Yeah, it's very unusual. As far as we know, it's the only time in the United States history where people were asked to vote, a broad population of citizens were asked to vote on human rights. And I think that I would love for Massachusetts to make a rule, pass a law that you can't have human rights on a ballot.
I agree.
Because it's demeaning, and we should never do that again.
It was, and at the end of the entire process, I know that some of the opponents were interviewed, and they said that everything that they were using were lies.
Yeah, I saw that.
They just came right out and admitted, we were lying about all of this. We just didn't want transgender people to have human rights and be our equals. But we stopped them. And it was, like you said, it was a huge coalition, Nancy. Like,
the tension was so. I was at the hotel where when the returns were coming in. The tension was so great. As people were coming in, after the polls had closed, and we just didn't know which way it was going to go, and we were hopeful. We had left everything on the field, as it were. But then when it started to come in, and we started to realize that this was going to pass, and not just pass by a whisker, it passed overwhelmingly.
Exactly.
And so put it to bed. This is done. We're not going to deal with this again in Massachusetts.
I think for me, the moment that I had hope was the night before, when you all had asked me to come to Eastern Bank to do a presentation with, there was 2 other trans women there with me. And we got up and we shared our stories with everyone and filled in some questions. And at the end of it, the entire audience stood up and cheered and clapped. And that was like, okay, and I didn't want to have that hope, because I'm the kind of person that's like, you haven't won until you won. And I hate to think of this as a winning or a losing situation, but it very much was. Either I was going to win and keep my rights, or I was going to lose my rights. I had made plans to leave the state.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't have to.
I bet you weren't alone.
I bet I wasn't alone.
Yeah.
I bet I wasn't alone. But instead, Nancy, here we are sitting down right now on Kelly's Quest. And I really do appreciate you coming here. And we're going to be wrapping up in a second. I don't know if there's any last things you would like to share. As far as I think about this entire big picture, I do want to share this, is I feel emboldened that I now have to go do more because of what we've done in the past. And I know that part of it is because you all did all of this ahead of time, and I'm standing on the, what's the saying, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, that's why I can see so far, or something like that.
Well, I think that the real key is to realize that the strength of the win was because of a broad coalition of allies. It wasn't any single population of people that made the difference. It was everybody recognizing this was the right and smart thing to do and working together to do it. And so there'll be a time when someone else needs to build that coalition, and you and others need to consider that and hopefully join that coalition so that we can progress.
Right.
We can all be the best we can
When
be.
the least of us move ahead, all of us move ahead.
Precisely.
But Nancy, I want to thank you so much for all the hard work you put into this, and for Eastern Bank for being there as a business, really behind the scenes, pushing hard right along with everybody, because like you said, it was only through the efforts of everyone that this happened. And hopefully I'll never have to fight for my human rights ever again.
You should never have to do that again.
But if we have to, we'll do it.
We're never going to go backwards.
True.
We're going to keep fighting and move forward together.
Exactly. Okay, thank you so much, Nancy. I've enjoyed this conversation, and everybody out there, go do good in the world. Good night.
Good night.